right, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here to share our research findings that we conducted at end last year. Even though the research is really mainly around the domestic travelers' behavior, but we hope the sharing could inspire you to really think about the ideas and the new product development for not only the locals, but also for the international travelers coming soon, and to retain our competitiveness as a destination. Right, just a really quick recap on our research objectives. We were really looking at the domestic travelers' behavior, pain points, needs, and wants. And at the same time, we also look at a lot of those key trends over there and the best-in-class examples to really help us to identify the gaps as well as the opportunities that we can develop further along. Just to highlight how we done the research, first of all, we apply a macro perspective to really understand what are the demand out there. And then it's a good thing that when we're looking at the domestic travelers, the demand is really, really high. It's around 72% of our survey findings and participants are saying that they are still willing to explore Singapore, which they have already done so, despite the international internet travel opens. At the same time, closer to half of them are already exploring Singapore more than once a time in a month. That really gives us a good gauge in terms of how willingly and how open they are still looking at the Singapore's offerings. However, there is a need, right, to really looking at the other perspective, which is closer to one-third of the domestic travelers. They're not really looking into traveling in Singapore. And the main reason is really about the unattractiveness of the offering that we have. But that also presents an opportunity for us to really looking through and develop along the way. So what we've done, moving beyond the macro perspective, we're drilling down to the micro perspective in terms of the traveler's needs throughout the end-to-end user journey. This is guided by what we call the One Singapore Experience Framework, which is STB strategy to really adopt a visitor-centric lens to create a seamless and personalized experience for the travelers. And the stages, there are 4 throughout the framework. So there's a dream stage, planning stage, experience stage, and then sharing stage. I'm going to deep dive into each of the stages in details. So the first at the dream stage, as we all know that the common channels in terms of social, search engines, those are the common platforms that people are searching for information and getting inspired. But surprisingly, a large percentage of the domestic travelers are also relying on the existing news platforms to get those information, right? Like Straits Times, the Mothership, etc. So that is an opportunity for us to look at beyond what are some of the channels out there that we can develop and really encourage people to explore more of Singapore. And definitely different groups of people have very different interests. Food has been a very important highlight through our surveys and interviews, right? It's a way to, it's a very key important decision fact for a lot of domestic travelers for them to explore more of Singapore, especially going to those, neighborhood, unknown precincts or, more heartland. Throughout the interviews, they're also like a very strong community spirit when we're talking to them, talking about the food. They really shared about, the need and the want to really promote and support the local hawkers. With that also gives us another perspective, right? In terms of, we know a lot of international travelers are also, willing and looking at very authentic local experiences, and then looking at our hawker, food culture. That is not only just from our domestic travelers' perspective, but that will definitely benefit a lot of our international travelers coming to Singapore. With that also gives us some of the opportunities and I would say soft starters for us to think through what can we do more. So for example, in terms of the key interests, can we combine some of those key interests together to provide more interesting offerings, right? So for example, heritage and then the food tours together. And regarding the heritage, actually, I want to highlight that a lot of Singaporeans also have a special demand and high demand to get in touch with their heritage as while they're exploring Singapore, different POIs. They want to have like hyper insider experience as a way to learn more about Singapore, and that resonated very well with our expat community as well. Like I think around more than half of the expats are also highlighting that the arts, culture, heritage are very, very much to their interest compared to other segments. Hence, that's why we're talking about some of the solid starters. We'll be really combining some of those interesting aspects together. And whether we can also cater for very special tailored segments. So for example, outlets, right? Can we have more organized trips for them as accessibility and convenience is quite an important piece for them to navigate more of Singapore. Moving forward to the next stage, book and planning stage, and this is where we discover quite a lot of the pain points, mainly around the SM measures, the crowd, as well as the lack of convenience, accessibility. As we all know, right now, going to the attractions or places, you had to make bookings in advance, and even the time slots, right? That really developed a lot of pain points that people either booked the ticket but forgot to book the time slot, result that mean like couldn't go into the the attractions and places in time. But of course, throughout the times with more education, I think people are slowly changing their behavior, but that is still a very important piece to streamline the experience for them, to kind of give them the reminders and more communication around that. And at the same time, in terms of crowd and in terms of making sure the experience is safe, it's quite important, because a lot of people are complaining about they don't know really the crowd and density in the attractions or in the different experience in the places until they get there. So that will be something to really look at. Elderlies, again, really stress a lot on the convenience and accessibility. That is quite important for their decision making. One additional thing that we find out is related to the hidden costs, right? So some of those hidden costs and obscure pricing models are really the deal breaker for quite a few of the travelers that we've been talking to. So in terms of the opportunities, right, lying around this stage is really about thinking out about box. So how can we offer or even communicate more around, easy cancellation or easy of the reschedule the experiences? Can we take our step right even further to see whether we can be more transparent in terms of our pricing models? And at the same time, to develop new capabilities. So for example, like even dynamic pricing for tours or experience at different times of the day, provide real-time time slot availability for people to book the trips and tours and experience on the go. Right, am I jumping ahead? Sorry. So in the next stage, experience stage, right, as actually Keith mentioned before, right, in terms of refreshment of the experiences, and that is definitely a very key demand among all the domestic travelers. They cited strongly that they want to visit another, they won't repeatedly visit an attraction if it's not really refreshed. So that also help us to really think about how can we do more to help to refresh the experience at the POIs. Some of the case studies that we look at, right, which they do quite well in terms of like this stage. And for example, Gardens by the Bay, they really did very well to blend the experience between the wellness as well as the art together, which generate a high demand locally. And if you think about, think beyond Singapore, for example, in Japan, Hishino Resort, they've been really successfully to retain the occupancy rate because they've done a quite good job to combine the Kyoto culture experiences as well as their regional tea ceremonies and campaigns very well together. So that is somewhere we were trying to stress on in terms of how we can blend some of the experience together. And talking about refreshment, can we even rely on a lot more in terms of the seasonal or and occasions, right, that can generate more interest and more ideas. On top of that, there's another element in terms of again, the local experience and authenticity of those experiences. So where I think the thought starters or ideas will be really lying around, how can we, develop our capability to help the tour guide, to help the people to really boost their storytelling capabilities. At the same time, think out the box, right? There's any other tools that can help not only the domestic travelers, but international travelers to explore more of Singapore. So some ideas we have is like, okay, maybe it's, public transport tours, right? So that will address the need of convenience and accessibility, but at the same time, it really, bring you over and out to more those unknown precincts and areas and neighborhoods. All right, the last stage that we have is definitely the sharing stage. So the sharing patterns, what we find out, it's very, very natural, right? A large percentage of as a matter of fact, it's like 73% of the travelers, right, domestic travelers, has been, sharing, on the go after exploring the experience. It's very, very natural. And one thing I like to stress on is about user-generated content. It has been very, very, very popular and important for people to decide on, to make the decision before they go to those places. And the other one that we find out is also, right, for the locals, in order to share their experiences, whether with or without incentives, they're happy to do so. So that leads us to think more around how we can, encourage more user-generated content, more conversation and ideas spur around online communities. How can we think about maybe ways to, creative ways, right, to really encourage more of the sharing, either via gamification or incentives. I think more importantly is also for us as the industry, players, right, really to keep tab on what's happening online, what's happening in the communities, right? What are the topics and interests are really, developing? That is a great opportunity for us to grab and then to develop real-time, offerings and experience along the way. That brings me to the last part of the sharing, which is the 5 key segments that we identified from our user interviews. So for students, pricing, accessibility, as well as the group size is quite important. And for our senior segments, definitely accessibility is important. At the same time, wellness is something they're looking forward, which accessibility is also something important for parents, right? People with pets. They are also a very interesting segment that we should not forget. For married and families, right, with more higher spending power, they're more looking for activities and workshops as well as staycations. And lastly but not least, right, our Malay segments, to them, the halal F&B still remains a very important piece for them. All right, that comes to the end of my presentation. I know there's quite a lot to absorb, so we do have a QR code here for you to download the full report as well as some of the summary pieces. And I'm happy to answer any questions or feedback along the way if you have. All right, thank you so much.
Ladies and